This is Archbishop Bailey from the House of Balliol, and coming to you representing the Third Temple Church. And this is our platform and our podcast that we would like to share with you about your English heritage. Okay, so our King Clifford Jefferson from the Royal House of Plantagen has done a mighty work in presenting this to our people. So we're here to share this on this platform to engage with you brothers and sisters so that we could bring this message and sound these trumpets for the people to announce that it's time for us to receive our freedom. Okay, so the ancestors have been working with us. We want to present this to you. So I would like to introduce myself, and then Bishop and our King will introduce themselves to you, and we'll begin. So just a brief little introduction about myself. I'm 36 years old. My background as far as religious upbringing was Christianity. I grew up largely raised by my grandparents who grew up out of the deep South. So they came out of Alabama and Georgia, as many of our ancestors came out of the South and made various migrations. So we ended up here in Ohio. And over the years, I just had a deep passion and love for my history and wanting to learn as much about my ancestors as possible. And I'm a very avid reader and studier. So over the years, took time to try to study and find out as much about my ancestors as possible, and learn various different and study different religions and stuff, and trying to find some type of connection, wandering, trying to find who we were in time and what we were here to do and how we should move forward. So eventually I found my way over into following behind the Prophet Noble Drew Ali and following the doctrines in the Moorish Science Temple. Although I never personally joined the temple, I studied with several Moors and very proficient in trying to study the doctrine and keep up with those principles. So ultimately, those studies led me into the community in trying to seek understanding, eventually led me to where I rest today and where I've risen from the position where I rested. And that was when I came under the tutorship and tutelage of King Clifford Jefferson from the Royal House of Plantagen. And through our brother, through our king, I was able to learn of my heritage as an Anglo-Saxon Berber and as an English national. And we began to learn and study how we're supposed to use that and apply that to our freedom today. So over the course of this series, today it would be episode 1, but over the course of this series, brothers and sisters, we hope to present to you in a very clear form and fashion a clear understanding of our heritage as English nationals.
Peace and love, family. This is your brother, Bishop Beaumont from the Royal House of Beaumont, coming to you from the Third Temple Church. And I would like to introduce you of my background and origins. I come from, well, my family comes from the South, which was South Carolina originally, and they traversed to Mississippi, where the Beaumonts end up establishing more of the family before they decided to come up north to Ohio. I was always told via my grandmother as well as my grandmother's sister that we come from across seas or somewhere, but they said that we didn't come from Africa, nor were we a descendant of slaves. And they never once brought up the story of us being Native Americans or Indians. And what ended up happening was once I asked my grandmother's sister, where did we come from? Then she had said, well, you'll know via your great-great-grandfather his name. And I said, well, what was his name? And she told me his name was Britain. And it shocked me. I'm like, Britain Belmont. I'm like, I never thought of hearing a melanated man with the name Britain before. And it took me onto this journey to like say, you know what, let me check and see what Britain they were speaking about. And I thought they was talking about Britain, Honduras, but it turns out to be that the Britain here, like this is technically where they were talking about. So next thing you know, I end up going down the rabbit hole and introduced to other school of thoughts, i.e. the Moorish Science Temple of America. And I never became actually a member in the temple, but I have worked with various Moors who were part of the temple as well, Moors who weren't part of the temples, to try to get information in regards to, like, you know, connect the dots in this information of our lost historical background that we seem to not know anything about, that was causing our specific situation, i.e. Mental darkness and mental enslavement. That's probably the better way to say it. Next thing you know, I listened to the teachings that the prophet had brought, and the ones that stuck to me was the ones where, after I met Rex Clifford Jefferson from the Royal House of Plantagenet, he had connected the dots in regards to the kings and queens as us being descendants of, and then went ahead and verified it from what I was reading out of the Moorish Holy Quran, 101s and 102s. And then I just started thinking and like, hold on, if everything right here is telling us that this is who we are, then why haven't nobody put these pieces together? So next thing you know, Rex Clifford Jefferson L, his videos just kept bringing me to each and every little piece that I kept feeling inside my heart. And I'm like, hold on, you can't tell me that nobody's talking about this. And he's literally laying it out the same way I've been feeling my whole entire life. And I knew, like I said, this is who I was supposed to be following tutelage under, so that way I can be welcomed home into the kingdom of the English nationals, which is the kingdom of heaven, which is England. And I am happy to be amongst you two, Archbishop Bailey, as well as Rex, for bringing me together to get this information out there as a family, like the world needs to see us again.
Bishop Belmont from the House of Belmont. On behalf of the Archbishop Bailey from the House of Bailey, who's under the weather right now, I'm pretty sure he'll be back real soon, so wish him well. We're here today, with a fabulous and historical and conclusive facts in regards to who and what you are in lieu of what we call demographics. We understand that, well, first of all, let me introduce who and where I come from. My last name is Jefferson, which comes from Godfrey, but the clarity that comes from that surname will be discussed in today's lessons and as well as prior lessons. But in my growing, I was a member of the AEO, Ancient Egyptian Order, under Dr. Malachi York. And as Archbishop Belmont said, it was just a school of thought for me. From there, I went into the more Scientific America under the tutelage of Grand Chief Lord Nature L. Bay, Temple Number 10 in Asbury Park. And as, like I said before, it was just a school of thought. I was learning and progressing. The origin of where that came from was the church, as mentioned by Archbishop Belmont, which led me on a journey to find myself and not to realize that that journey was only preparing me to come back home, which is back to the church. So I give honor to the church and my forefathers and foremothers. Today is going to be a beautiful lesson. Let me just first put a disclaimer in. This is not to hurt anybody. Sometimes the truth hurts. Sometimes, as the person called Jesus said, when you're nurturing and feeding yourself and something that's abnormal or something you never had before, it might go down bitter. But if it's all you got to eat, then you have to do what you got to do. I'm pretty sure after eating it for a while, it becomes comfortable. It starts to taste good, and that's how you have to do with these lessons. It's out of your comfort zone, so humble yourself and just don't take what we say for face value. Stop, rewind, press, go forward. Do what you need to do to be able to digest it, to get a full and conclusive understanding so that you can know what your demographics are in this territory we have here today. Let me just also let you know that I speak fast, so I'm going to try to slow it down. Also, I suffer from anxiety. So if you see me catch a breath once in a while, it's because I'm trying to calm down my anxiety because I'm really excited about this. But with anything, it's hard because I really care about the freedom of my people, and it's unbearable for one man to carry. So I give honors to Archbishop Belmont and Archbishop Bailey from their houses to help me in this journey to bring our brothers and sisters home to the church. And with that, let's get started. Archbishop Belmont going to bring you to an article in regard to the origin and history of the registry in regard to the birth certificate, which is called a settlement certificate in regards to us born to an ecclesiastical province, what we call the Roman Catholic Church. Without further ado, let's get started. Archbishop Belmont, you can start reading from the article, History of Registry, and I'll stop and interject when needed and when noted.
Okay. So here's the article that we have coming from the website laframboise.securitycovenant.com. And the article is about the birth certificate that we're explaining in regards to all of us, which we all, i.e. America, have been succumbed to have to deal with. So let me go ahead and start reading it. And it says, history of registries. The existence of a birth certificate is prima facie evidence of the existence of a title. The existence of birth certificates and the statutes that created them, from settlement certificates to admiralty-based birth certificates, is overwhelming and irrefutable evidence of organized and systematic slavery, in complete contradiction to all laws claiming the abolition of slavery and servitude. As settlement certificates and later birth certificates are evidences of a receipt of a title being issued. 1. Settlement birth certificate. A settlement certificate, also known as a birth certificate, since the formation of central records and registers in 1836, number 1, is an official document possessing multiple legal functions and states under the central presumption that those against whom such instruments are issued are a form of property and bonded servant slave to Western Roman and private banking interests, regardless of status of family or history. So
Let me interject. Brothers and sisters, as you can see, it states in 1836, this is under the what they call the House of what we call handover. House of Handover was under the primacy of King George the First. This is also in reference, or speak to the reference of, I don't know about anybody else statutes of their state, residing state, but in the New Jersey revised statute under Title 16, Chapter 1, Section 28, it speaks about rights stated under the charge of Great Britain. And pertaining to this King William, he was ruling under the Parliament of Great Britain at this particular time. So keep that in note.
Absolutely. 2, under statutes and policies promulgated from Westminster and other bodies, a birth certificate fulfills multiple and distinct functions in states, depending upon its recognition and activity at hand, including, but not limited to, 1, certificate of title to cesti cui use, of person being recognition that the state claims ownership by virtue of the certificate itself and all the information contained on it, therefore approving a cestui v trust in place, and that a man or woman or newborn to whom the certificate applies only has beneficial use of the name. So right here is saying that you don't own the name. The person who created the so-called certificate, they own that name. And it's really up to you to prove that they don't, which you really won't be able to prove without having the information we're going to present to you today.
Exactly right.
So please see for Cestui v Act 1666, Chapter 11, 18, and 19, Chapter 2. Also, it says, see Article 4 in the source below. If the supposed dead man proves to be alive, then the title is revested, action for mean profits with interest. So it's saying that if you can prove to them that you're alive, they would give you what's actually yours. But it's your due diligence to prove to them that this is you. They're not going to come and tell you. And you realize all of these years, no one else that came and told you who you truly really were. Think about it. All right, let's continue. 2, certificate of title to property being the recognition of the fact of a birth certificate, being a certificate that the name is property and therefore the man or woman or newborn is now treated as property and no longer as a living man or woman, subject to the rule of law, astrum iris divin canonurum, in original Latin with the word Canaan. 3, certificate of deposit and bailment custody, being the recognition through the terms used to describe the father and mother that a transaction has taken place and the newborn is no longer owned by the parents, but is the custody of the state. any higher estate under Roman Western law recognized as possessing political and topographical territorial boundaries and sovereign jurisdiction under parliamentary and government apparatus, with the newborn noun a thing, subject to the jurisdiction of the courts, having been registered enrolled. So
let me speak. Let me interject before you speak on.
okay.
But go ahead. I can follow through. Go ahead.
So what I was just saying, just the newborn babies themselves, as you can, they're considered a thing. They're not even really considered as a natural people yet. You're just a thing. And go ahead, Rex. You want to go ahead and
Okay,
continue?
yes. And how you qualify that with a conclusive is the New Jersey Revised Statute 1:1-2. Once again, for all those who reside in the state of New Jersey, look under 1:1-2 of the New Jersey Revised Statute, and it defines words and phrases that are used in any statute within the statutes of New Jersey. And it says these words and phrases, unless exclusively noted in that statute, means what it says in the statute wherever you see these words. Okay? Now, if you look at the definitions in these statutes, it defines population. It defines population. Population is governed under the federal definition under Title 13, Chapter 1, Section 1 of the United States Code, which denotes to respondents as corporations, individuals, firms, etc. Now, when you're dealing with the population or inhabitants of the so-called demographics, it denotes, or when you hear the terms or words or phrases such as person, gender, he, she, it, male, female, these are also defined as corporations, individuals, firms, etc. They also denote to them as being numbers. So when you look on your birth certificate, you see a classification denoting to gender. It denotes to a number on the actual vital record, which are within the definition, because under Title 26, Chapter 8, Section 1, and Title 26, Chapter 6, Section 1 of the New Jersey Revised Statute, these govern the words and phrases as defined under New Jersey Department of Health and Vital Statistics. Now, they define everything except child or birth certificate, but they do define vital record or live birth. Now, look at these definitions, brothers and sisters, and see, as stated by Archbishop Belmont, that you're not a human being. You are a number, a statistics. Continue on, Archbishop Belmont.
Thank you, Rex, for that clarification for the people, so that way that they can see not just from what we're reading from this web article, but if they do, especially if they live in the so-called territory of New Jersey, look within their own constitution, they will see that this is verifying the same thing.
Exactly.
Okay, so number 4 of the list, certificate of second-class citizenship under Sestui Q use of person, being that the certificate recognizes a newborn not being a citizen, but a second-class citizen not having full control over their body or mind or name or spirit, all claimed and put forward by others above as public officials. So once again, this is telling you that the child itself born, so once you come onto this plane, you don't own it. Or the mother and father does not have ownership or guardianship truly. He who created the certificate owns. All right, let's go to the next one. Number 5, certificate of bondage as slave, being the certificate as recognition of a man or woman or newborn as a member of the poor, the paupers, the infants, the idiots and lunatics, the horned cattle, the beasts, the creatures, the humans, the dispossessed, the insolvent debtors, and criminals and enemies of those who have created holy, mythical, religious, and legal texts, the debt slaves. So once again, it doesn't matter if a so-called religion you believe in. It doesn't matter how far back in so-called time that you think that you found your ancestors. If you have a so-called birth certificate and it coming from so-called Roman diocese, they own you.
Can I interject?
Absolutely.
For instance, I'm gonna give you myself. My certificate of live birth was filled out by my parents. Well, actually, a worksheet was filled out, and then that information from the worksheet was transferred to the certificate of live birth, which is then transferred to the city register and the state register. Now, I was born within the ecclesiastical province under St. Peter's Hospital. Now, St. Peter's is named after St. Peter, which is what you read about in the so-called King James Bible. He was born in the year 33 AD, and the year 33 AD in the Gregorian year is in the Julian year or the Berber year, the year 950, which when King Edgar the Peaceful, which was the first king of England, he was the first king of peace who ruled. Now, St. Peter's is a Roman Catholic healthcare system. It's overseen by the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Metuchen, which is subject to the jurisdiction of the Roman Catholic Church of the Archdiocese of what we call Trenton. Okay, now both of those dioceses or archbishop Roman Catholic facilities are governed or first established by what we call the Roman Catholic Church of the Archdiocese of Baltimore, that was established in 1783 by way of the diplomatic Benjamin Franklin, who went to Pope Pius VI, who was a French Roman Catholic, which gave them the ability to be a free nation, such as to do what they call the Revolutionary War by way of the Treaty of Paris. That wouldn't have been honored if they didn't agree to having what they call a superior immediate mission that was established by a bishop named John Carroll. He was the first bishop of the United States. Now look up this guy. He had a brother named Daniel Carroll. He was one of the founding fathers who hooked up with George Washington, who was the first president of the United States. Now, when this was introduced, they established what they call a Roman Catholic ecclesiastical province, because they broke away from the French Roman Catholic Church by way of this treaty. Because under what we're going to get into, it's called the Corporate Act of 1661, as well as the Test Act, which was the act created by the Church of England under Henry VIII, which we're going to get into. I don't want to jump the gun, but your brothers and sisters are going to be amazed. Continue on, Archbishop Belmont.
No problem, Rex. Okay. And to the last number 3, sorry. The term birth is a synonym of the Admiralty term berth, B-E-R-T-H, from the late early 1600, meaning a fixed address or position on a ship, or a room in which the ship's company mess resides, or a space for a vessel to moor, settle. In terms of the history of birth certificates, settlement certificates can place free people as slaves, wards, infants, cattle, poor, and commodities for a monetary debt system. It is needed to be noted here at the settlement in reference to this instrument, the full process of administration, distribution, and closing of the entire estate, and the word instrument noted here in reference to settlement and birth certificates with the meaning from Latin with the present document, unless otherwise specified, in which case it shall mean a document possessing certain requisite legal form, such as a deed, covenant, charter, letters patent, indenture, contract, writ or warrant. In this case, for the letter definition of letters, in this case, for the definition of letters patent, from Latin, from 14th century Latin, letterae, or patentes, meaning literally an open official letter. From 12th century Latin, letterae, see letter, and patentes, see patent. A letter's patent is similar to respect to a charter in being used for official grants, titles, laws, right or monopoly, and also in respect of honoring traditional form, including the incipit, the datum, and the seal. However, letters patents may be on the several pieces of paper and not vellum, animal skin, may use black ink instead of red, and a printed seal instead of a bulla. So a lot of these patents that you see out here, chances are, if it didn't come from a higher authority beyond so-called Roman Catholic charters, then pretty much you're owned by Rome.
Exactly.
All right, so number 4. In 1535, Numbers 2, King Henry VIII of England and his Venetian Magyar banking advisors seized the property of the poor and the common farmers under the pretext that they were small religious estates. By 1539, number 3, he did the same for large religious estates. By 1540, all property was to be owned through estates, effectively being welfare funds granted by the crown to the benefit of use of subjects, with the most common being estates for the non-wealthy, now considered wards of the estate. Then in 1545, King Henry VIII reintroduced the title directly and solely connected to the slave trade of Rome, abolished by emperors and forbidden under Christian law called the Custos Rotularum, meaning literally keeper of the slave rolls, into every county to maintain records of the poor, non the slaves. And then in 1547, Edward VI issued a new statute that did forbid people considered poor from traveling, except for work, or from claiming their own time and activities and whether or not to work. All people except those members of the ruling elite, particularly those non-Christian sects from Pisa, Venice, and parts of Spain, responsible for wholly false religious and legal texts, now declared slaves were either to be gainfully employed in the service of some lord or master, to work to death, or if they were found to be idle or enjoying life, then they were to be seized and permanently branded with a V and either sold as a slave or exterminated.
Let me interject right quick, Archbishop Belmont. You spoke about King Henry VIII, which by virtue of the fact, he said he was the advisor of the Church of England, but he was not of English descent. People get this twisted. When you hear the English word, you automatically think about the 13 British colonies. No, you're not. They're totally different. The British colonies were subject of the British Crown, who were Protestants who dissented from the Church of England. You got two types of people. You got the nonconformist Protestant and you got the Roman Catholic. This is why the Church of England was established, because it was based off the Treaty of Union through the Settlement Act of 1701, which the Protestants get their authority to come here and do what they do. Now, within the article that Archbishop Belmont read, it spoke about states and estates. Well, I just want to read the definition of the word state, estate, as well as status. Okay? It says state, a noun. 12th century, circumstances, position in society, temporarily attributes of a person or a thing. Condition. From Old French, it's stat, position, condition, status, stature, station. And directly from Latin, status. A station, position, place, way of standing, posture, order, arrangement, condition. Figuratively, standing, rank, public order, community organization, noun of action from past participle, stem or stare to stand, from pi root sta, to stand, make or be firm. Some Middle English senses are via Old French, estat, French, esti, or see estate. Now, mind you, when people interpret language, they use 3 different languages: English, Latin, and French, and Spanish. But those are the 4 languages that they use to determine the origin of words. So now it defines estate. Estate, early 13th century. Rank, standing, condition from Anglo-French. Now that's a whole history that you brothers and sisters know nothing about. It says from Anglo-French, estat, Old French, estat, state, position, condition, health, status, legal estate. From modern French, état. From Latin, status, state or condition, position, place, social position of the aristocracy, from pi, root, sta, to stand, make, or be firm. Also draw your attention to our ancestors who were called free people. Before they were called people of color, they were called free people. All right, we're going to get into that. Also, the definition for estate means for the unetymological, let me slow down, for the unetymological sense of property is late 14th century from that of worldly prosperity, specific applications to landed property, usually of large extent, is first recorded in American English in the 1620s. A native word for this was Middle English, ethel. Old English, I cannot pronounce that. Ancestral land or estate patrimony, meaning collective assets of a dead person or debtor, is from 1830. Last but least, status. 1670, height of a situation or condition. Later, legal standing of a person. From Latin status, condition, position, state, manner, attitude. From past participial stem of stare for stand. From pi, statu, from root style to state, make or be firm. Sense of standing in one society or profession is from the 1820s. So as you can see, the word status, estate, and state are all uniform, but it's just how you apply it. When you use the word state, it means that you're subject to the estate that has been compromised by those who invaded. Why? Because you have no status or standing in law. Continue on, Archbishop Belmont.
Absolutely, King. Number 6, under Queen Elizabeth I of England, a set of measures were introduced which had the effect of accelerating the disenfranchisement of land peasants into landless paupers. In 1589, peasants then required local parish permission to erect dwellings, whereas before, the erection of a dwelling by a land peasant on their lord's land was considered a right. As a result, the ranks of the landless poor or paupers swelled as available to be press ganged into work. So according to this, it sounds like, and not only sound, but what actually happened was, as people's land was getting taken from them, only way for them to be able to do anything at this moment was they had to go get permission. They had to go to a local church to even get permission to be able to build anything. And this is taking more and more and more of the so-called rights of the people away, that they didn't even realize it until it was too late. All right.
Let me interject, as well as people need to realize that these are houses. Right now, you're dealing with the House of Tudors. Before you had the House of Tudors, you have this is called the War of the Roses. This is important history, my brothers and sisters, because all these people are fighting over our state, i.e., the English church, which is called the Houses of Wessex. Okay, so now you're dealing with Queen Elizabeth I. She's the daughter of Henry VIII. At this particular time, all of the monasteries were destroyed by way of what we call the English Reformation and the Protestant Reformation from the Roman Catholic Church. Continue on.
Absolutely. 7, to placate the overwhelming hostility against England, the new slavery type system, exploitation, and superstition, a new act was introduced in 1601. And a secret version, as to begin to industrialize high and franchise slavery with the introduction of overseers of the poor as the foreman over the slaves under a cleric of the parish, and the renaming of children sold as slaves and workers to be called apprentices. Thus, the apprenticeship system was invented not to improve conditions, but to rebrand slavery under the non-Christian English.
Let me interject there. Once again, you get into a time era of the 17th century. Right then, you have what they call the classification, or what they call cultural assimilation of the so-called natives. Now, I'm not going to say Indian, because we're not Indian. Mm-hmm. We were cultivated into what we call the American way of life, and we classify as Native Indian, Native American Indians for that matter. We were not Indians. We were English Anglo-Saxon tribes identified by the term Berber. Freemen. The word Berber means freemen. Like I said, the Mississippi culture were called freemen, free people. And that's a term that goes back to Louisiana, when we were under French Roman Catholic jurisdiction. I hope you brothers and sisters know your history. This takes you into the massacre of the Powhatan tribe, whose chief name was Betty Ann. That name is on my birth certificate. Betty Ann Jefferson. And Old English is Godfrey. So we were a tribe living amongst ourselves before the colonists came here, known as the British colonies, identified as what we call Anglo-Saxon or white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, which were British subjects, not two English Anglo-Saxon who were actually Berber tribe called what we call Berber ancestries of Great Britain, which we can truly prove, or we're going to prove we're Berbers. Continue on, Archbishop Belmont.
Okay. And I'd like to also interject on what Rex was saying. In that year, that time frame, brothers and sisters, between 1589 and 1601, Elizabeth I did an edict called the Edict, the Expulsion of the so-called Blackamoors. And if you read that edict, even though they said it did not take place, things did take place. A lot of stuff happened. And within there, they did explain the difference between so-called Negros, so-called Blackamoors, and anybody of that nature. They all were still considered subjects of the crown. So even though that they was expelled during that time frame, they were still considered crown subjects. Also during this time, brothers and sisters, that's when Queen Elizabeth I, as well, the Sultan of Morocco, had created, which we call the English Barbary Company. The English Barbary Company, which we're not going to go into too far into details with, but the English Barbary Company was again set up with the so-called Sultan of Morocco at that time, and in my opinion, this was where a lot of the slavery was taking place, with the removing the dark nobility from over, which we call so-called, i.e. Europe, and placing us in bondage in America and rebranding us. This article is also verifying.
Also, another interjection, speaking upon what Archbishop Belmont stated, you also have what they call the Holy Experiment. In regards to what was passed to Charles II from the House of Stuart once it transferred from Queen Elizabeth I under the House of Tudors. It shows you that they're stemming or going back to that Magna Carta of 1215 under the Plantagenet Crown, because William Penn created his own Magna Carta. It was called the Holy Experiment. And if you look it up on Wikipedia, it clearly shows you Charles II and William Penn over in England with a Moor as a servant, standing in royal guard. But when he made his way over to North America, all of a sudden now you see Native Americans walking around with feathers in their head, walking around with what they butt out. So it clearly shows you that under the term Moor, that was a term given to you by a hostile takeover. And we're going to get into that in further lessons, but for the sake of time, we'll let Archbishop Belmont go on.
Okay. All right. So the next part, which is just talking about, this is the Venetian Pisan model of commerce. And it says, the act also introduced a new levy collected by parishes, was called the poor rates, now called council taxes, against wealthy property owners for their rent of use of the poor as slaves. This is the financial origin of annuities 100 years later. 8. Under Charles II of England, the concept of settlements as plantations of working poor controlled by the Church of England was further refined in 1662, including for the first time the issuance of settlement certificates equivalent to a birth certificate, passport, and Social Security rolled into one document.
Wow.
And also I want you guys to understand that there's a difference between the Church of England and the English Church. They're two different establishments. One is the true church and one is an imposter. Okay, so let me continue. A child's birthplace was its place of settlement, unless his mother had a settlement certificate from some other parish stating that the unborn child was included on the certificate. However, from the age of 7 upward, the child could have been apprenticed and therefore sold into servitude for some rent paid back to the church as poor taxes. The act also made it easier for the clearing of common houses of the poor, and for the first time made the definition of poor the value of tenancy being a taxable value of less than 10 euros per year or pounds. The act also modified the age of emancipation from child slavery to adult slavery at the age of 16. So this meant that from when you were born, not only are you put into servitude, but your servitude classification changes as your age changes. And then not only did it change, but you was also charged for being poor. They charged you for being poor. All right, so let's go to the next. Absolutely.
As well. Now we in the 17th century. We're dealing with the House of Stuart under Charles II. But this goes on well into the 20th century when you look up a guy by the name of Walter Plecker. Walter Plecker was, since we're talking about the birth certificate, Walter Plecker was the first post-register of biostatistics, which is now called the Department of Health and Biostatistics. He was a white supremacist. He's the one who what they call the Integrity Act of 1924, had all, it was called the Segregation Act. And what he did was had all the classifications of the so-called natives to be now classified either colored or black. I just spoke about free people and free people of color. There's a difference because Walter Plecker had a reclassification of the so-called indigenous people as colored and black. Why? Because they're constantly trying to take over the Anglo-Saxon identity. You had the Anglo-Saxon, what they call the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. Now you had him, which was part of the Anglo-Saxon Club in the 1920s. This was what we call the Great Migration of the indigenous people of what we call the Mississippi culture. You had two migrations. You had one in 1916. You had one in 1940. Why did you have this? Because in 1916, you had a rise in the Ku Klux Klan. It got so bad, it was over 60 million of them, Klan members. So that forced the natives to come north. This is where you get the Harlem Renaissance in 1924. Watch what you call Harlem Nights. It will tell you right there. Stop watching stuff for entertainment when they're trying to tell you or paint a picture for you. Continue on, Archbishop Belmont.
Absolutely, Rex. Number 9. No one, under some dictates of 1662, no one was allowed to move from town to town without the appropriate settlement certificate. If a person entered a parish in which he or she did not have official settlement and seemed likely to become chargeable to the new parish, then an examination would be made by the justices or parish overseers. From this examination, the oath, the justices will determine if that person had the means to sustain himself. The results of the examination were documented in an examination paper. As a result of the examination, the intruder would then either be allowed to stay or be removed by means of what was known as a removal order. The origin of the modern equivalent of an eviction and removal notice when the sheriff removes people from their home.
Wow.
And to see people, this was back in so-called 1662, and it's still playing out today.
Yes,
still
sir.
playing out today.
Can I interject?
Absolutely.
Why? Just look around your neighborhood. You see the property being owned by foreigners, right? If it's not being occupied, it's either boarded up or got a gate around it because they can't do nothing with it. Back in the early, like we were speaking about, up to the 1970s, their main concentration was removing us from our estate. How did they do that? They start giving to community foreigners the rights that belong to us. Now, when you walk out to the corner store, all you see is foreigners. When you look at the so-called urban communities, you see foreigners. Why? Because once all the so-called natives are separated from their property, now the foreigners got to go back home, and they control it all now. And this is what's being done to us to this day and time. In this day and time. Go ahead, Archbishop.
Absolutely. All right, number 10. In 1667, the concept of workhouses were formalized and licensed as being effectively places where people considered prisoners could be legally and effectively worked to death for the profit of the elite under the full endorsement of the Church of England.
Wow. I'm
This
glad
is
you pointed that out. When you said there's a difference between the Church of England and the English church. You're absolutely right.
because today we know this is the reason why our people are against the church. And that was all done on purpose, because if they can get you to not believe and trust in the church, then they know then you're out for picking for wrong. So, and especially for our sisters today, like I understand a lot of them want to, express themselves and be free. We all do. But there's a way that it has to be done, because the way that they're trying to give it to you today is not the way that the Most High set up for us, so that way we can continue to live on this earthly plane. So we have to honor our foremothers and forefathers and do it the way that they did it, so that way we can stay alive this day and era that we're living in today.
One more interjection, Archbishop Belmont. For those who remember, every word means something. Until it's clarified, it's presumed to mean what you assumed it to be. When we say mother and father, or honor our mother and father, we're not talking about the people who birthed us.
Absolutely.
Those are your parents. When we say mother and father, we're dealing with the land and that what gave us the ability to originate from the land, because you can't own property without owning land.
Correct.
You can do business on the land, but if you don't own the land, then you operating unjustly and falsely. That's called desertor. So now what happens is that it's important to understand that when you look up the terms and words and phrases dealing with the word mother and father, father is the term, or the origin of the word father comes from England. The origin of the word mother comes from Scotland. Okay? So when you say mother and father, or when we say mother and father, we're not talking about our biological parents. We're talking about the land, England and Scotland. That's our mother and father. Go ahead.
Absolutely. And thank you, Rex, for clarifying that for the people. So continue number 10. All right, it says, this is the act that invented the concept of employment and an expansion of the highly profitable debt slavery business models of English aristocracy. Thus, people who were taken into custody by virtue of being poor were expected to work as well as live in conditions that, to say the least, were not the best in civilized history. And isn't that going on today, brothers and sisters? Those who live in the so-called hoods or the so-called ghettos, you're still living in subpar conditions that weren't even fit for our ancestors. Like, we would have never lived in these type of places. And we have now succumbed and accepted as the norm.
Yes.
Well, we're going to fix that today.
Yes.
11, the poor prisoners through the workhouses employment model was extremely profitable, and a new act was required in 1670 to regulate the corporation's renting of prisoners as employees for profit, particularly in the paying of their accounts to the crown. So pretty much you're being rented out. As you can see, most of you probably don't even get a chance to sleep and spend enough time in your so-called home that you purchase. You spend more time at the plantation than you do at your so-called home. So this right here is letting you know that you don't own anything. You're actually a debt slave.
Yes. Also, I would like to interject that in this time era, you have what they call the introduction of the industrial age in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. They were the industrial age, which means that there were poor conditions. You know, you had a lot of death going on, and registering was not for the purpose of birth. It was the purpose for death, because the origin of birth started with your family and your home, or with your church. All of a sudden now it was mandated by an act of legislation through Virginia and Massachusetts, with the first colony of the so-called foreigners, i.e. the British colonists, who were Protestants from the Roman Catholic Church seeking a better life. Go ahead, Archbishop.
Absolutely. Number 11. Oh, 12, sorry. 12. Previous acts were continued and some made perpetual, such as the controls over paperwork and settlement certificates as the origin and ancestor of birth certificates by James II in 1685, as one of the few acts that the ruling elite permitted to remain as an active statute of Westminster under his reign.
Let me
So-
stop. Let me interject right there. What people need to realize that King James II was the son of Charles II, and what's her name? Henrietta. What's her name? Henrietta. Give me a minute. Let me a second. Henrietta Maria, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, Henrietta Maria. She was a Roman Catholic. So this was Charles II's wife, who was the father of James, who was the father of Queen Anne, the last ruling monarch of Great Britain. Once they established the treaty union of 1707, there was no more England.
Mm-hmm.
England sovereignty was decimated, and that's a problem because now King James took on the identity of the first king of England. How can that be? That means that you must be in the Dark Ages right now.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Archbishop Belmont.
Okay. Number 13. Under William and Mary of Orange in 1691, the acts of workhouses of the poor were continued and further refined, with greater oversight on paperwork and accounting for poor entering and leaving parishes to prevent fraud by overseers and corporations.
Let me interject. When you're dealing with William and Mary of Orange, you get into what they call the education of the so-called new classification and cultural assimilation of the Native Americans. They set up schooling to reteach you what they wanted you to know so it can carry out their agenda. All the so-called natives, now classified as Indians, now have been culturally assimilated into what they call the American way of life. So now we're trying to get into Harvard, Princeton. But you see all these schools are in what? Churches,
Mm-hmm.
cathedrals, abbeys. They know what it is, but we don't. Go ahead, Archbishop Belmont.
Absolutely, and thank you for letting them know that, because today a lot of folks who still think, like I said, they're not owned by some type of ecclesiastical oversight, and they are. Number 14, in 1697, an act of Westminster was the introduction into, or subsection 2, of the badge of the poor with the letter P to be worn at all times on the shoulder of the right sleeve. The use of the P as a form of curse and stigma is the same model of modern passports for citizens listed as P, paupers, poor, peasant, prisoners, property, peon, used today. 15. In 1698, an act reinforced the measurement of the poor being one who does not have an annual lease taxable at 10 pounds or more, making at the time more than 95% of the population of England, Wales, Ireland, and Scotland poor. 16. In 1713, the extension of settlement certificates as of negotiable security was introduced for the first time and continues with birth certificates today, whereby those born in a place but without a settlement certificate, including women and children, could be moved to a different location, such as a commercial workhouse, when the cost of such certificates were purchased by a corporation.
Can I interject again?
Absolutely.
Now, going back to Title 26, Chapter 8, Section 1, and Title 26, Chapter 6, Section 1 of the New Jersey Revised Statute, they don't define birth certificate or childbirth under the definition of words and phrases. But because they felt to define these terms in regards to the vital record that says it's you left up to define it because everything is governed by a law.
Mm-hmm.
You just can't use something. When you go to the court system, they got a system of law set up. Now, because of the department, whether it's a state agency, county, municipal, on up to the federal level, failed to define birth certificate or vital record, you're left up to define it according to some type of interpretation that's governed by law, which brings you to Title 1, 1:1-2 of the New Jersey Revised Statute, which states words and phrases according to acts, laws, and statutes that mean what they mean in any statute of the New Jersey Revised Statute, unless expressed, which in this case they express person, gender, male, female, person, population, inhabitants as corporations or numbers. Now, for information for you brothers and sisters, the word number or the number system originated from what we call tally sticks. They didn't have number system back then. They used little sticks. Watch the Pirates of the Caribbean. They were called tally sticks or tally marks for accounting. Now, if you deal with the Navy, they know about that. Now, with these tally sticks, back in those days, under the Acts of Parliament, they used to clean out the chimney. They were called chimney sweepers. Parliament burned down in the 17th century. Parliament burned down as a result of the chimney cleaners, which were called climbing boys. Now look up climbing boys on Wikipedia, and look up pictures and show you a picture of this is New York City, for lack of a better term, black boys, young boys, through the industrial age, with their tools for climbing up in chimneys to clean them. And all these houses were close together, as Archbishop Belmont said that when one fire started, it took everything out. Go to Newark, go to Philadelphia, and those urban, or what they call the hood, or or what they call the projects, that's what you get. All right, Archbishop, go ahead, brother.
Okay. Number 16. In 1713, the extension of settlement certificates as of a negotiable security was introduced for the first time and continues with birth certificates today. I read this, but I'm gonna read it again. Whereby those born in a place but without a settlement certificate, including women and children, could be moved to a different location, such as a commercial warehouse, when the cost of such certificates were purchased by a corporation.
Stop right there. Now, once again, I just filed a lawsuit for the public if they want to know. I filed a law. Remember, you never fail. Now, I filed a lawsuit suing the Department of Health and Biostatistics on the very same thing I'm teaching about. The only problem with the lawsuit is that I didn't bring this attention to the actual parties who I was suing. That's a violation of due process of law. You must give them the ability to be able to correct their error. But I took the long way around. I automatically filed a lawsuit. Now, what this did is put these people in the situation, because I'm bringing the same argument back to them, let them know that you failed to state the demographic, which connects me back to my ancestors, i.e. the English church. Failing to do so would be classifying me as a Roman subject being born in the ecclesiastical province under a Roman church or Roman corporation known as St. Peter's General Hospital, which is a Roman Catholic healthcare system. So you must go or travel back through the door that you came from. You can't go forward. You got to go backward to fix this. Okay, go ahead, brother.
And thank you for saying that, Rex, because a lot of our people they miss the big point in what they actually have today to save them, and it's that surname.
Yes.
And if they keep it and they honor their foremothers and forefathers and travel back in time, they will save themselves.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So number 17. Due to the increase in number of poor in 1722, a new law was passed. The act expanded the ability for a wide variety of business owners to contract with church wardens for the rent and use of the poor as indentured servants and apprentices.
I'd like to interject if I could.
Oh, absolutely. Continue. They need this.
Hey, listen, brothers and sisters. If anybody know who what does it mean to hand over? What does that term mean? To hand something over, right? Now, King George got his authority from Queen Anne in 1714. That was the transformation from the house of handover to the what they call it, the house of Stuart to the house of handover. Now, these were Romans. This is a very violation of the Treaty of Paris. No Roman Catholics could be a part of the Church of England. And it's total violation because if you look at Title 16, Chapter 1, 1628, it says, right saved under charge of Great Britain, saved from repeal. This is in the 2020 New Jersey Revised Statute. So any intelligent person will ask themselves, how can there be a statue from Great Britain that's saved from repeal in New Jersey today if you separated from Great Britain in 1783?
Somebody lying.
Somebody lying. All right, go ahead, brother.
Okay. In 1733 was issued by Westminster and remains an underlying pillar of the slave system today. Poor people who could not purchase a license to be considered married will have their children deemed bastards. In 1761, Westminster declared that all poor as infants and who could not realize the underlying system of slavery, and then that's the key, they could not realize the underlying system of slavery, were now doomed as dead in law by their registration in the bills of mortality and the creation of the civil birth rituals being rituals of death that continue today within modern hospitals and registration of newborn babies. This was further reinforced with the act in 1767 that poor children were to be registered and considered dead in law. Y'all hear that? And they say it's still today. This is still going on today, whether how many entertainers or fake leader guys come out here to tell y'all we got to march, we got to do this and do that for our freedom. But how many of them actually told you you got to go back and honor your mother and father, England and Scotland?
And that's something you don't have to pay for. It's already written in the scriptures.
This is free. All of this is we're telling you is free. You just have to accept it.
Accept it.
That's that war that you're going to be fighting within yourself to accept either this or continue to accept that Holy Roman doctrination, feeble information that they've been giving you via their corporations as well as their servants in many different areas that you deal with today.
Let me interject real quick too as well. And now, I know a lot of brothers and sisters, a lot of scholars, a lot of adepts out there are thinking, yeah, well, this is all good and dandy of what you're talking about, but you just said you lost your court case, right? So what prevalence does it have? What the prevalence is that, remember, majority of suits that we're bringing in the court of law of this grave magnitude are lost. We don't win them. They don't plan on giving it up. But what I was doing is knocking down the stone, chipping away at it. So when I brought the suit against the defendants, Department of Health and Biostatistics, I didn't go to them and argue this in lieu of due process of law. And the judge knew this. So a lot of time now, I'd have been all the way to the Supreme Court. I didn't argue things such as I'm the landlord. And the judges have told me, I have never heard an argument such as yours, but unfortunately, you're in the wrong courtroom. And when I kept hearing that, we get all emotional, energy in motion, and now listen. That's a faculty. Taste, touch, smell, sight are faculties for listening, interpreting, as you just said. We have to interpret what's being said. So when the judge was speaking, he was instructing me what to do. He can't come right out and tell you. He was just telling you, he was instructing me what to do. So now the so-called defendants think that this argument is over. And what they don't realize is that now I'm giving you due process of law. I'm informing you that an error has been done in regards to the demographics of who, not just me, but every brother and sister, gender, which can either be male or female, of English, Anglo-Saxon Berber descent. And failure to do that will be exposed from our affiliation or fealty to the English church, where our rights are protected by the Magna Carta, which is signed under the House of Plantation under the Kings of Anjou under Godfrey, i.e., which is my surname, Jefferson. This takes you back to Jerusalem, the Crusade Wars, Knights of Crusades. This is where this argument goes back to. Go ahead, Archbishop.
Okay. 20, sorry. Beginning in 1773 with the Enclosure Act, 1773, followed by the Enclosure Consolidation Act, 1801, English Parliament effectively privatized massive amounts of common land for the benefit of a few. causing huge numbers of land peasants to become landless paupers, and therefore in need of a parish assistance. In America, this caused massive rebellion, as well as in Ireland and Scotland, and contributed to forming a patriot militia, leading to the War of Independence.
Mm-hmm.
Almost the entire patriot militia were deceived, captured, and executed in New York in 1777 under a deal between George Washington of the United Company of Merchants Blue Army and General Cornwallis of the East India Company Red Army. The Enclosure Acts are the foundation of land title as it is known today. 21. Because of the deliberate legal said theft of land under parliamentary enclosure laws of the late 18th and early 19th century, the number of paupers dramatically increased. This led to other laws being introduced to deliver the slave labor force needed for the Industrial Revolution through the Poor Law Amendment Act 1834, which effectively stated that the poor could not receive any benefit unless they were constantly employed in a workhouse prison.
Can I interject with that?
Absolutely.
Okay, this is very important now because we're dealing with a time era in 1834. This is under what they call the United Kingdom, Great Britain. Now, this also takes you to a time era when we're dealing with the industrial age. When World War I and World War II took place, it was at the same time of the Great Migration, was it not?
Correct, it was.
The same time, 1914, 16, and the second one was 1940.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what this is doing is that when the so-called English went off to consistent with the Germans and the Nazis, you have to know the history of the Germans and the Nazis because the word slave comes from the word Slavs, which were Indian, Indo-European tribes. Now, the Germans, this is where the word color comes from. All right? Look up the word German. The origin of the word German is color. Because all these people took our place when we migrated to the north in lieu of the Industrial Revolution, which Bishop Belmont just read. Because when they massacred our ancestors in the 17th century, known as or identified as the Powhatan Native American tribe and any other indigenous tribe of that time, because of what they did to the land, we had to migrate to the north and east coast, which that became our new Mecca now. So it's very important to realize why they did it, because once we left there, they took over. Go ahead, Archbishop Belmont.
Okay. Let me see what I left off last part. Okay, 21. Because of the deliberate legal said theft of land under parliamentary enclosure laws of the late 18th to early 19th century, the number of paupers dramatically increased. All right, so I read this already, but I'm gonna read it again. This led to other laws being introduced to deliver the slave labor force needed for the Industrial Revolution through the Poor Law Amendment Act 1834, which effectively stated that the poor could not receive any benefit unless they are constantly employed in a workhouse prison. Most framework of dictates and edicts of Westminster remained in force and were not repealed by this act. Thus, despite international treaties against slavery, the very word slavery being wage slavery or lawful slavery was born, whereby men, women, and children lived in terrible conditions and were continued to be worked to death.
You want me to continue, Archbishop? Okay, I'll continue to read from thus forth. But I want to make a comment in regards to this as well, because when it spoke about lawful slave was born, whereby men and women, children live in terrible conditions, and whereby continue to be worked to death. But it also spoke about, where's that at? It talked about the Death Registration Act of 1836 and Section 22 or Point 22. What people don't realize that if you look on the Title 26, Chapter 8, Section 24C, when a child is born, he registered under what they call New Jersey Electronic Death Registration System, because the violation of Section 28, which means that the parents are supposed to fill out the information, i.e. demographics for the child. But because they didn't do that, it falls under Section 29 of Title 26, Chapter 8, which says that all certificates of live birth are registered on the electronic death registration system. not just birth certificates, marriage certificates, divorces, and any other, as we mentioned in this article that we're reading. So automatically, you're filed under electronic death registration system that only records dead paupers.
Absolutely.
Okay. Go ahead, brother. And these are New Jersey revised statutes. We're not even in the 18th century now. We're in the 21st century, and we're reading this.
And it's still applied today. We can look around. We don't ever have to like guess it. You can just look around yourself in your neighborhoods, and it's still playing out.
Yes.
Still playing out. So, 22. In 1836, the Births and Deaths Registration Act of 1836 was introduced, which for the first time created the General Register Office and the requirement for uniform records of births, deaths, and marriages by municipal councils and unions of parishes. Thus, on July 1st, 1837, the birth certificate was formed as the successor of the settlement certificate for all paupers, disenfranchised of their land birthright to be considered lawful, voluntary slaves with benefits provided by the local parish region underwritten by the Society of Lloyds.
Wow.
And to interject on that, when it was saying about you were only given a so-called benefit if you were employed in a workhouse prison. So that's letting our people know today, those who get Social Security, welfare, all of that stuff. Remember, you had to be an employee to be first for you to get that. So if you was an employee, that's letting you know you work in a prison. What prison are you working in? Hold on one second.
Take your time, Archbishop Belmont. Sorry about that interruption of the public. Give us a second.
Okay, I think
I'm pretty sure information is overwhelming, but take your time and digest it. I know it's bitter going in, but once it's settled, it's going to be sweet as honey. And as Archbishop Belmont getting the view correct, I'd just like to continue to reiterate that the time era we're in, under Title 16, Chapter 1, Section 28, it says rights saved under the charters of Great Britain. Saved from repeal, which means that it's under parliamentary sovereignty. So that means that somebody got some rights saved by a charter. And the oldest charter of the Parliament of Great Britain is the Magna Carta. That's the oldest charter. Anything other than that, it's called royal charters that are deeds. They're not allodial. You know, so you have to go back before he who wrote your books. When I say that, I mean, I'm talking about those who are presumptive heirs. And that goes back to 1066 when the House of Wessex fell, which through later lessons we're going to discuss, because like you said, you know, time never was, but man was not. You know, we're going to take you back into time immortal. And the term time immortal has a meaning in law. And that takes you back to the time of Richard II, who's son of Henry II, the son of Godfrey, Viscount of Anjou. He's the one who's ruling France and England at the same time, in which my family surname, as a descendant of this lineage, are antecedent and descendants of these people.
Okay, I'm back. Let me see. Video. Okay, my camera had died, so we're just gonna have to continue without it for right now until the battery charge.
Okay, you want to close out on this section?
Let me see. Let me see if I can pull up my ring screen camera. Give me 1 second.
Give us a second, public. All right, brother. All right. Technical support. I'm doing pretty good with my anxiety. It ain't bothering me.
Oh yeah, it gets easier. It gets easier as we continue to keep working on this, because this is my first time I have anxiety as well, Rick. So I'm in there with you, and just like how your mind work, mine does as well. Like it's so fast that my words, I can't catch them up fast enough. So it can sound jumbled or words not coming out the right way, but all the information is there.
Yeah, you can read it from the script.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when we say something wrong, the script is right there. You can read it for yourself. But I'm pretty sure everything that we said thus far is verbatim.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to continue on 22. Let me see where did I leave off at. Okay. In 1836, the Births and Deaths Registration Act of 1836 was introduced, which was for the first time created the General Register Office and the requirement for uniform records of births, deaths, and marriages by municipal councils and unions of parishes. Thus, on July 1st, 1837, the birth certificate was formed as the successor of the settlement certificate for all paupers disenfranchised of their land birthright to be considered lawful, voluntary slaves with benefits provided by local parish region underwritten by the Society of Lloyds. 23. Beginning from 1871, and I remember the year 1871 was the same year of the so-called Organic Act of the Columbia Organic Act that established the so-called United States District of Columbia.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the same year. So pay attention to these dates.
And to interject, in lieu of the Organic Act, remember that the District of Columbia got their territory in which they exist in from Virginia and Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
Which were the first two colonies where the birth certificate or the creation of the birth certificate was created by act of legislation by Massachusetts under the House of Stuart. Mm-hmm. So all this area all this stuff is happening in Virginia, the first colony. Go ahead, brother.
Okay. So beginning from 1871, further historic changes in administration of vital statistics, such as birth certificates and death certificates, with the introduction of health districts or sanitary districts. The Local Government Act of 1871, Public Health Act of 1872, and in 1874, and the Public Health Act of 1875, created a system of districts called sanitary districts, governed by a sanitary authority responsible for various public health matters, including mental health, legally known as sanity.
Wow.
Wow, yeah. Wow.
They ain't talking about no sewage dump. They talking about your consciousness.
Wow.
Are you saying?
That's big, folks. That's big. Okay. So two types of sanitary districts were created, being urban and rural, while the sanitary districts were abolished in 1894 with the Local Government Act of 1894. The administration of the poor is still maintained in part under the concept of district health boards of guardians, including magistrates and other justices of the peace.
Wow.
24. In 1948, the National Assistance Act was introduced and supposed to abolish the poor laws. However, many of the poor law acts were not repealed or abolished, as evidenced by the tables of repealed acts that miss key acts, otherwise remaining with full force and in effect.
Let me interject.
Mm-hmm.
Public also note, if you pull up this article, you see the numbers. You can actually pull up the actual legislation from the Parliament. So this article we're reading is right on point, because you can actually hit the number, which is the actual legislation passed by Parliament by the United Kingdom of Great Britain. So, you know, it's right there. They're telling you in their own words what they did to us. But we went around studying something else that has no prevalence in what it is that we're trying to establish for our people.
Absolutely. 24. In 1948, the National Assistance Act was introduced and supposed to abolish the Poor Laws. However, many of the Poor Law Acts were not repealed or abolished, as evidenced by the tables of repealed acts that missed key acts, otherwise remaining with full force and effect. 25. Since 1990, under the United Nations and the World Health Organization, WHO, by the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the system of issuing birth certificates as proof of a man or woman being a permanent member of the underclass has become an international system. 26. In respect for the adoption of the multiple functions of the use of the information and generic form of a birth certificate within present Western Roman systems, whilst the same general form and extracted information almost exactly the same as a birth certificate may be used, example, a bond or other form of security, unless it is officially titled. A birth certificate is said not to be therefore a birth certificate.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
You hear this?
Wow, yeah.
And it says it right on that vital record, birth certificate, but yet the Department of Health failed to define it in their own statute that governs them.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder why.
Yep. It is also said that there is no evidence that bonds using the same information derived from the birth register information using the title birth certificate, when it most likely the term bond is used. Therefore, any presumptions that precisely the same certificate is used for creating bonds may be a gross error, when possibly in fact the real question is the use of the information.
Can I interject right there?
Absolutely, King.
You notice they said, therefore, any presumption of law that's governed under New Jersey Rules of Evidence, Article 101, Article 201 and 202, and Article 3, 301 and 302. When you're dealing with presumptive law, if anybody brings a claim in regards to a presumptive argument, what we call in law a presumptive fact, you have two, a conclusive fact and a presumptive fact. A presumptive fact is considered to be a fact until proven otherwise by a conclusive fact, which means that you don't, if it's proven conclusive, there's no need to argue it. And that goes into what we talk about time immortal, past the memory of mind. See, most of the time, most of us talking about we come from thousand years ago. How you know? How you know you go back that far without some present reference to go that far? In law, that the courts honor. Because right now they're governing our moves, our language, our understanding, and our outcome. So you got to go back and find yourself, because everybody's history is interpreted by English law. Right? If your origin of where you come from is not English, just drop it. And nobody's able to do that. Why? Because it's the foundation from where you're standing on.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, brother.
Absolutely. Ignorance is possibly presuming the precise same form of a birth certificate, and is used possibly in all cases of applying the information, is a major contributor to permitting plausible deniability as to use or misuse of such information by governments. In respect of the adoption of the Admiralty term birth in relation to newborns, the historic record of statutes of Westminster are a highly unreliable indicator as to the origin of the use of the word birth, in substitute for historic more ancient and more common terms in the English language, such as the nascens, from Latin nasci, meaning born, or filio, or kin, or born. In fact, the majority of European languages, with poignant exception to English, continue the tradition of using words descended from nasci to indicate the arrival of a newborn.
Let me interject right there. Going back to Title 6, Title 1, colon 1-2 of the New Jersey Revised Statute of words, phrases that are defined in acts, laws, and statutes. We know that the word gene and genos are the same words, which would come from the word which the gender derives from, which can only be two, male or female. But yet, because the Department of Health has failed to define gender under Title 26, Chapter 8, and Section 6, Title 26, Chapter 8, and Chapter 6, Section 1, they failed to define gender. So we left up to define gender under 1:1-2 of the New Jersey Revised Statute, which defines gender as a number. As a number, brothers and sisters. So according to the government, you are nothing more than a number.
And in respect of, let me make sure I'm right. Westminster statutes indicate the term birth being used to describe newborns by the early 1700s. However, this should be discounted. Instead, the most likely introduction of the term birth to distinguish from birth, B-E-R-T-H, is by early 1800s, such as following the transfer of control of the registration of all vessels to Admiralty in 1795, and reinforced in 1813 and 1823, with, in respect of birth certificates, clearly being derived and depended upon the history of acts concerning settlement certificates of the poor and the commercial control of Admiralty. Any possible argument, claim, judgment, edict, statement, affidavit that denies the overwhelming prima facie evidence that birth certificates are descended from and a variation of settlement certificates is possibly irrational, unreasonable, and an error and null and void from the beginning. Any public official or occupant of public office that denies birth certificates are derived from settlement certificates and the poor laws therein could be mistaken.
Wow. Wow. They tell you, anybody trying to rebut this argument that it didn't derive from settlement certificate is wrong.
It's wrong. And the point of interest, you don't hear many people even talk about so-called settlement certificates.
Yes.
So
yes.
if they ain't never heard of it, chances are they don't know.
Yes, yes. Just like, for instance, a reservation is called a plantation. That's what it really means. When you look up Calvin's case, Calvin case is a case that protected English subjects, right? But it actually excluded Native Americans. So now they'll tell you if this particular territory are what they call English overseas possessions. So now, if you're not of English descent, then you have no right as an Englishman or an English woman. You speak English, don't you? Got an English last name, don't you? So only two things can come out of it. Either that is a name of a slave master or it belongs to you. So it's the only two results that can come from this. But we don't want to even argue that.
Absolutely.
If you who you are, then go in the court of law and tell you I'm not English. But you can't do that. Why? Because then you got to question where your mother come from, where she come from, her answers, and so on and so forth. But you say, heck with that, I'm going to change my name altogether. That's called a self-classification. Now you have no rights to just soil, meaning born on the soil, or just sanguineous, which means of royal blood.
Exactly. You just made yourself non-descendable.
Non-descendable. There you go.
Okay. Any of the surrender, return, rejection of a birth certificate by definition of the poor laws that remain in effect and including the law of admiralty and settlement certificates actually places the individual in greater moral danger without any sensible advantage. Wow. That's this big, brothers and sisters, because today we have a lot of, unaware people out here who not even paying attention to the birth certificate, who said they're going to create their own. And we already read and shown you that you can't really create your own and think you're outside of Rome. That's not how it works.
Let me interject as well. And for all those who saying, that's not true. Well, the American Bar Association states it as well. And when you on your own time look up American ABA concerning birth certificate. And what they will tell you is that the birth certificate is not a clear paper trail.
Mm-hmm.
They clearly tell you that. They also tell you that the origin of it goes back to the church and the parents. That it didn't become legislatively mandated until the United Kingdom ordered it in the 19th century.
Yep.
In their own article, they state this. These are attorneys and lawyers. So it's right there for you, brothers and sisters. Go ahead, Archbishop.
Okay. A man or a woman who has perfected their own title, proving the right to ownership over their own property and possessing such and through the prescribed models of applicable law is able to demonstrate a far superior claim and position to any official or enforcement officer under the birth certificate regime when bonded and indemnified in admiralty. So that pretty much means to me is that once you prove that you are who you say you are by connecting the dots to your ancestry all the way back to your mother and father, England and Scotland, and remember, this ties you all the way back to the Magna Carta of 1215 that was signed by John I of England, that many are called John of Lackland. This is your salvation.
Your salvation.
If you read the first clause, it says that the English heirs and the English church should be free forever.
Forever.
Forever, ever. And if you understand what forever means,
that's time immemorial.
That's time immemorial. 1189. You can't.
1189.
If you're trying to speak any claim before the year 1189, they might send you for an psych evaluation.
I'm telling you. And with the ending, read the last paragraph, Archbishop Belmont.
Under the perfectioning of one's own title, the birth certificate is relevant as most persons are registered with the proper roles of the estate as property of the estate.
And this is the Department of Health and Biostatistics. Now, we're going to go through 2 more points, and then we're going to close out this session. So you brothers and sisters, or the people, can digest this by doing your own research, and you can tune in for lesson 2. We're still going to be talking about this birth certificate, but I want you brothers to see when America was established. It was established on behalf of the English Church, which is now called the Church of England, by Roman Catholics who now dissented from the Roman Catholics by now calling themselves nonconformists, which are Protestant, which are not English descent. They're posing as English people. So now I want to take you to what we call, because as I stated earlier in this lesson, that my birth or certificate of live birth was filled out by the physician in St. Peter's Hospital, which is under a Roman Catholic ecclesiastical province under the Diocese of Metuchen, overseen by St. Francis Cathedral, right, which was initiated by Pope Francis, which oversees all the so-called dioceses. Now, first, Archbishop, pull up a list of Catholic dioceses in the United States, if you can.
Okay.
And we just want to get a visual view of the jurisdiction that the ecclesiastical provinces govern. Brothers and sisters, or the people, you pull them up as well.
And we're going to pull that up on Wikipedia?
Yes, on Wikipedia.
Okay.
Remember, Wikipedia is baby food. When you feed your children, you feed them Rick, right?
Yep.
Wikipedia for a child. So right now, we are children. So we need to be fed. So we can put this puzzle together. Give us a second.
Okay.
There you go. Read the first paragraph, Archbishop Belmont.
All right. List of Catholic dioceses in the United States. The list of the Catholic dioceses and the Archdiocese of the United States, which includes both the Diocese of the Latin Church, which employ the Latin liturgical rites, and various other dioceses, primarily the eparchies of the Eastern Catholic Churches, which employ various Eastern Christian rites and which are in full communion with the Pope in Rome.
Stop. You hear that? This is they're in full communion with the Pope of Rome. This is St. Francis.
Mm-hmm.
All right, continue to read, Archbishop Belmont.
The Roman Catholic Archdiocese for the Military Service, USA, is not a metropolitan diocese. The personal ordinary of the chair of St. Peter was established on January 1st, 2012 for former Anglicans who joined the Catholic Church.
Okay, so what they're talking about is that this is going to come under the House of Tudors under King Henry VIII. He established the Church of England, which is called the Anglican Church, which is the first church established in America under what they call the Archbishop of Diocese of Baltimore under John Carroll. And this is the Catholic Church. This is the only way America got this foundation. Now, Archbishop Belmont, scroll down to, territory, provinces, and dioceses.
Okay. All right, I'm on here.
Okay. Now, as brothers and sisters as well, pull it up so you can see for yourself. As you scroll down, it starts in alphabetical order of all the ecclesiastical provinces in regards to dioceses that were set up in the United States. That goes back to the one set up by John Carroll, the first bishop under the authority of the Roman Catholic Pope named Pope Pius VI, under French authority. All right, so you scroll down, each one can scroll to their respective territories, but in this case, we're going to scroll down to what we call New Jersey. Keep scrolling. Archbishop, you're in Puerto Rico, right?
Yes.
Okay, we're going to scroll and see if we see it for Puerto Rico as well. And those where you're at, you just go down to see your prospective territories. Mine was your first. Go down to New Jersey.
Yours just shows Newark.
Newark, you see Newark? That's the Archbishop Diocese under Newark. This is where the Diocese of Metuchen, you see Diocese of Metuchen right next to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right next to it. These are all the archdioceses. Now let's go down to New Jersey.
I understand. I don't see New Jersey on here.
It's down there. Keep scrolling. Hold on. Let me see. Hold on. Let me get it right. What was I saying? I'm sorry. Baltimore.
Okay, Baltimore. Okay.
Give me 1 second. Let me get back up there. Give me 1 second. There's a long list of them, brother. Let me just get there for me.
And one thing.
Okay, so you see this, right? The Archdiocese of Baltimore?
Yep.
Now click that. Brothers and sisters, click that. Now this goes, you see all the provinces in the map. I'm sorry, go back and show them the map right quick.
Okay.
Show them all the map where all the dioceses is.
Right here to your right.
You see all the in the United States, all the dioceses are noted by color. You see that?
Yep,
now, brothers and sisters, take a good look at this map, brothers and sisters. Now, all the origin of all these dioceses goes back to the one in Baltimore. Now, go down to the Baltimore diocese.
Okay.
All right. Now, click that. Archdiocese of Baltimore.
And I'm there.
Now, scroll down, brothers and sisters, down to history. And start reading from there, Archbishop Belmont.
Okay. History. Before and during the American Revolutionary War, the Catholics in Great Britain's 13 colonies in America were under the ecclesiastical jurisdiction of the Bishop of the Apostolic Vicariate of the London District in England.
Stop right there. Now, the Bishop of Apostolic Vicariate is called the Roman Catholic Church of England and Wales.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, it's the Roman Catholic Church of England and Wales. Now, to get the origin of that goes all the way back to the conversion of the Anglo-Saxons by Pope Gregory I under what they call the Gregorian mission. You can pull it up on your own time, brothers and sisters. For the sake of time, we can continue on reading. Go ahead.
Okay. After the Treaty of Paris, signed September 3rd, 1783, ended the war, Maryland clergy delivered a petition to the Holy See on November 6, 1783, for permission for the missionaries in the United States to nominate a superior who will have some of the powers of a bishop. In response, Pope Pius VI on June 6, 1784, confirmed Father John Carroll, who had been selected by his brother priest as superior of the missions in the newly independent 13 United States of North America, with power to give the sacrament of confirmation.
Stop right there. Now, this sacrament of confirmation was like it's mentioned in the biblical references in the Bible. It's a show. It's dealing with the Last Supper when Jesus gave bread and wine to his disciples. Now, this is actually a legislation that was practiced in the parliamentary days. Now, this is for the Roman Catholics, but it was actually governed under what they call the Church of England, which you get into what we call the Corporate Act and the Test Act. No one can take office in the Church of England without conforming to the Test Act or what we call the Corporate Act in regards to holding office. Mm-hmm. This is why they established what they call the sacramental test in 1828, so that it will allow Roman Catholics to actually take office, which is why we're in the condition we have today.
Absolutely.
Okay, keep reading.
This act established a hierarchy in the United States and removed the Catholic Church in the U.S. from the authority of the Apostolic Vicar of the London District. Maryland was one of the few regions of the colonial United States with a substantial Roman Catholic population. Pope Pius VI proceeded to erect the Apostolic Prefecture of the United States, encompassing the entire territory of the United States, with its seat in Baltimore, and appointed Carroll as the first apostolic prefect on November 26, 1784.
Okay, stop right there and go down to colonial. Hold on, let me see, where's that? Go down to, let me find it, give me a second. Where's it at? Now let's hit John Carroll. Hit John Carroll. Let's go back up and hit John Carroll, the first bishop of the church. Father John Carroll. And go down to, I don't know why it's not there. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Now go back to the church. Go back to the church. Roman Catholic Church. Let me just find it. I think I'm overlooking it, but give me a second. I'll find it. Where is it at? I'm overlooking it, but I will go back to it. I'll find it later. But as we read about John Carroll. I'll go back to John Carroll, brothers.
Okay.
Read about him.
John Carroll, Archbishop of Baltimore. John Carroll was a prelate on the Roman Catholic Church who served as the first bishop and archbishop in the United States. He served as the ordinary of the first diocese and later archdiocese of Baltimore and Maryland, which at the first encompassed all of the United States, and later, after division, as the eastern half of the new nation. Bishop Carroll is also known as the founder of Georgetown University, the oldest Catholic college university in the United States, and of St. John the Evangelist Parish of Rock Creek, now Forest Glen, the first secular or a diocesan, meaning that it is the clergy did not come from monastic orders, parish in the country.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so as we can see, John Carroll was the first bishop here in North America, and it was done on behalf of Pope Pius VI. This is very important, brothers and sisters, because if it wasn't for John Carroll, there will be no North America, because it had to be subject to the ecclesiastical provinces under the church. This is why the Roman Catholic Church separated from the United States, because he was governed and given authority as superior of the so-called immediate mission to set up bishop here in North America, which all your dioceses, as we just seen on the map, come from. So I'm pretty sure yourself, your children, your mother, and your father were subject to the ecclesiastical provinces, which is under the Roman Catholic Church. And the only way out of it is to go back to that Roman Catholic Church and make a claim and let them know that you belong to the English Church. And this is where your remedy comes from, brothers and sisters. And on that note, I know today's lesson has been beautiful in regards to shedding light on the origin of the vital record identified or called the Certificate of Live Birth, and the notes that it's governed and goes back to your birthright. And your birthright is saved from repeal in lieu of Title 16, Chapter 1, Section 28, which clearly states that right saved under the charge of Great Britain that's saved from repeal. And as Great Britain separated from the United States in 1783, which we're reading about, that means that somebody got rights saved that are dormant. And that's us, the English national. And it can only be re-inherited by showing your affiliation to the English Church by connecting back to the Third Temple, which was established by me and my Archbishop Belmont and Archbishop Beverly from the house, from their decisive houses in regards to restoring the King's Bench so that we can deal with the affairs of our people. And with that, I say peace, and I'll leave the remaining remarks to Archbishop Belmont.
Peace. And so there you go, brothers and sisters. To clarify what's going on in our issue today in so-called North America, it stems back to that so-called birth certificate that we all are subjugated with. And like Rex Clifford Jefferson said, only way for you to fix this, you have to go back to the so-called establishment, i.e. Roman Catholic diocese, who are claiming ownership over not only your vessel, but your parents' vessel and the vessel of your future heirs. And yes, you don't have too many options or too many opportunities now to fix this problem, as we can see and look around you. So with that being said,
hold on. There's two more things. I knew it was coming. I want to look up the Corporate Act of 1661.
Okay.
Type that in. $1661. Let me just pull it up myself.
Okay.
Brothers and sisters, please pull it up if you have your phones or your computers. Okay. Pull it up and start reading, Archbishop Belmont.
Okay. The Corporation Act of 1661 was an act of the Parliament of England. It belonged to the general category of test acts designed for the express purpose of restricting public offices in England to members of the Church of England.
Stop right there. Read that again.
The Corporation Act of 1661 was an act of the Parliament of England. It belonged to the general category of test acts designed for the express purpose of restricting public offices in England to members of the Church of England.
Stop right there. So now, who founded the Church of England? King Henry VIII.
King Henry VIII.
He styled himself a viceroy of the Church of England, but it was restricted in lieu of this Corporate Act by Charles II, who was a Protestant who rebelled against the Roman Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
So it's showing you that you can't hold no office of a municipal mayor, governor, because at this particular time, all the modern day terms in regards to public offices stem back to that parliament under what they call the province of New Jersey or any other territory that was under a province territory. So this Corporate Act or Test Act was a test created to make sure that you honored the ceremonial rights in lieu of your fealty to the English Church. Continue to read.
Though commonly spoken of as one of the penal laws and enumerated by Butler in this historical account of the laws against the Roman Catholics of England, it was not directly aimed against them, but against the Presbyterians. It was passed in December 1661, the year after the restoration by Charles II. The Cavalier Parliament aimed at restoring England to its state before the time of the Commonwealth. It required all the prudence of the Earl of Clarendon, the Chancellor, to restrain them. The Corporation Act represents the limit to which he was prepared to go in endeavoring to restrict the power of the Presbyterians. They were influentially represented in the government of cities and boroughs throughout the country, and this act was designed to dispossess them. The act provided that no person could be legally elected to any office relating to the government of a city or corporation unless he had, within the previous 12 months, received the sacrament of the Lord's Supper. According to the rites of the Church of England, he was also commanded to take the oath of allegiance and oath of supremacy, to swear belief in the doctrine of passive obedience, and to renounce the covenant.
Okay, let's look up the Test Act. Go to Test Act.
Okay.
1673. Read what it says.
The Test Acts were a series of English penal laws that served as a religious test for public office and imposed various civil disabilities on Roman Catholics and nonconformists.
Hit nonconformists.
Mm-hmm.
And it said Protestants, right?
Yep.
So when you hear the word nonconformists, they're talking about Protestants. So go back to what we just reading. So now that put them both in the same category. He's talking about Protestants and Roman Catholics. You hear, people?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not of English descent, then you fall in these two categories.
Protestant and Roman Catholic.
Roman Catholic. Go ahead and read it.
Okay. The act provided that no person could be legally elected to any office relating to the government, or, okay, I'm gonna say it again, government of a city or corporation unless he had, within the previous 12 months, received the sacrament of the Lord's Supper according to the rites of the Church of England. He was also commanded to take the oath of allegiance and oath of supremacy, to swear belief in the doctrine of passive obedience, and to renounce the covenant. In default of these requisites, the election was to be void. A somewhat similar act passed 12 years later, known as the Test Act, prescribed to all officers, civil and military, further stringent conditions, including a declaration against transubstantiation. These two acts operated very prejudicially on Catholics, forming an important part of the general penal laws, which kept them out of public life.
Okay. Go down to, you're still on the, we're still on Test Act, right?
That was Corporation Act.
Now go back to Test Act.
Okay.
And scroll all the way down to where it states, let me just find it. At the Test Act of 1673.
Okay.
And go down to the last paragraph before 1678 Act.
It says, the act was passed in the parliamentary session that began on February 4th, 1673, Gregorian calendar. The act is, however, dated as 1672 in some accounts due to the Julian calendar then in force in England.
Okay. Brothers and sisters, what you really need to know is that the Roman Catholics instituted what we call the Gregorian calendar by Pope Gregory XIII. Your calendar is the Julian calendar, which is known as the Berber calendar. Julius Caesar is associated with Rome, but Rome was a term that originated in the 16th century with the Church of England. So there really was no Rome because there's no calendar to support the existence of a Roman era. Because Rome was, the calendar itself was introduced by Pope Gregory XIII in 1582. He goes back to a line of popes, back to Pope Gregory I, during the Gregorian Reformation of the Anglo-Saxon conversion to what we call Christianity. This is where the term black comes from. If you look at the origin of the term black of the family crest, it says that black is a name or a term that denotes the people who have soot on them. This goes back to chimney sweepers. This goes back to industrial age in the 18th to 17th, 18th century in regard to what we read in the article dealing with the history of registry of that birth certificate. So with that, my brothers and sisters, you have some Jews that no one can ever take from you now. It's up to you to give them out. And I leave this discussion. I leave you in peace. Our next lesson that we give you will be compounded with what we discussed today. And we're going to go even more in depth with your identity, social status, in regards to you being in the state you're in lieu of your loss of your English status as an English national Anglo-Saxon Berber. And with that, I'll say peace.
Peace.